So my name's Catlin. I actually work up at Windsor High School, so I teach 9th and 10th grade English literature. And so I'm talking about a tool I just started using at the second semester of last year. And it's an online structured discussion tool. And what I was hoping to share with teachers as a way to inspire is this year should definitely be like the most challenging, the most frustrating, because I have my largest class sizes. I have less access to materials. There's like no paper on our campus already, or copy machines are breaking. And actually, it's quite the opposite. It's the first year in a long time where I felt really excited and innovative and more effective, despite the big numbers and the lack of access to paper and copies. And it's those things that actually kind of pushed me over to try something like this. I was really hesitant to use an online tool for really 4 reasons. One, I've never considered myself especially technologically savvy. I was a little nervous about giving students so much freedom on an online discussion tool. You know, type A control teacher, it just feels a little bit loosey-goosey to let them just engage in discussions when I'm not actively there. And third, I worried about access to computers. You know, how many students are going to be able to, how many have it at home. I know we have a library with a pretty nice computer lab, but still, that's them coming in their own time during the school day and making that happen. And then last, I just felt so overwhelmed with like my amount of work that I wasn't even sure I had the energy to just like explore something new and try to implement it in my classroom. And so I hoped I would be talking to teachers that would be looking for something to get them excited and energized and help save them time. Because as I've acclimated and become a better user of the tool, I definitely am making so much less copies. I'm using paper a lot less. I'm not having the piles of paperwork for homework that I used to feel like I was drowning in most of the time, reading comprehension questions and analysis questions for each chapter they're reading. And instead, I was posting these questions online that were really dynamic, and they were discussing, and their discussions were so different online than what I was seeing in my classroom. So in my classroom, when I teach academic kids, I teach honors kids, I teach a variety of levels. And in class, discussions just always fall flat all the time. The same students speak, which are few and far between, and then the same students don't say anything at all. That's all right. So I decided to explore the tool. I posted my first question. I actually did a bit before posting to try to establish expectations for student conduct online. My attempt to control as best as I could their interactions. And so we talked a little bit about like do's and don'ts online student communication. What is it appropriate to do when you're discussing with your peers? What are some strategies? What are some strategies for having conversations where you're not going to alienate people, but you're going to draw people in? We talked about what constitutes a substantive posting. Like, what's a posting that's going to drive our discussion forward? You know, asking questions about your peers' ideas, clarifying things, kind of taking a spin on something that's already been said, looking at it from a different perspective, outside the box. And so this is actually what my site, and this is my site right now. I have 164 users. All my students are on this site. And I post my questions. I have categories for each of my classes. And when I went over the expectations for student discussion, I actually posted them as PDFs on the site. So I went over them in class. We did some breakout group talking about, you know, how do you talk online when you're using Facebook, even when you're texting or when you're sending emails. Have you ever had a situation where you've said something and it's been misinterpreted? Why do you think that is? You know, we talk about the absence of body language and using sarcasm that then isn't interpreted. And so once we've established kind of clear expectations for how they should talk to one another, everything down to like the sentence starter. So here's how you start a sentence that respectfully disagrees. Here's how you start a sentence that's going to build on somebody else's ideas, and all of them started with student names, because one of the things that is another struggle in class is they don't address each other by name. You know, she said or he. They point around the room, and it's December, and I feel like there should be that community. They know each other's names, and so getting them to use each other's names online has been wonderful. So one of the features of this tool that I appreciate, especially for the time spent copying, the paper wastage, is now I'm able to embed these PDFs, and they just click on the PDF, and they can view whatever handout or material I would have given them anyway, and then a lot of times, for larger projects, I'll post them as a PDF, and then if they have questions about the projects, they're actually asking questions that their peers are then answering. So some of the burden of me, all the questions coming through me being the only person with the right answer, is alleviated, which is wonderful, seeing them be resources for each other. A couple of the things I want to do, and I have some resources if you're interested in exploring an online community. One of the things I love it if you walked away from this with were some support materials. How do you create and maintain an online discussion that's going to be healthy and sustainable and get people involved and make them feel safe, create a safe space online. After doing that, kind of the next step for me, and something I would definitely encourage people to do, is icebreakers online. So in class, at the start of the year, we do a couple, we get to know each other's names, I hope, and but then by doing them online, in the chat room and in our chats, our discussions, I've seen tangible changes in the way that they discuss in the classroom. And so I wanted to share with you an example. And I actually did create a few online icebreakers that could be used with classes, ranging from middle school to high school. Just interesting, fun, silly questions to get them dialoguing so that not everything that takes place on our discussion forum is very serious and very text-oriented, since I teach English literature. So here's an example of one where I asked them if they could choose an era, where would they go, and then what I love about this particular learning tool is it's very structured. So they click the one they would choose, but then that's not the end of it. They actually have to explain why they might want to go to the 1950s. What about that era is intriguing? And as you see their dialogue, you'll see the indenting, and that's when they're replying to each other. Like, oh, I love that you said this, or oh, I never thought of it that way, or oh, I love bell bottoms too, or whatever the situation may be. And so then they have these fun, kind of really natural conversations that don't have anything to do with curriculum, but really foster their relationships. And then whenever you're working with a question, once you close it, you have the opportunity to create what's a results page. And it basically takes the information and creates a really colorful pie chart. So that is actually the results page of our icebreaker. So I asked them to respond to the icebreaker and choose an era and explain why and respond to a minimum of 2 peers. And then I pulled this up for my class, and we just had kind of a fun follow-up discussion about it. And you can do this, I've done this for my academic questions as well, just to kind of bring those online discussions back in the classroom to make them more effective. And so the students can see tangible outcomes of their discussions and kind of comment on the fact that, surprisingly, almost 20% of the class is really just happy where they are and they wouldn't want to travel anywhere. In addition to being able to have multiple choice questions, there's a yes/no question feature. And I've experimented quite a bit with the yes/no feature in creating, trying to ask questions that might be considered more controversial, lead to some debates between students, get them kind of choosing a side. I encourage them to, if everybody said yes, 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 yes to a question, okay, can you bring up another point that's going to be kind of controversial that, respectfully, of course, that might broaden this, think outside the box, play devil's advocate. And so I actually just finished my To Kill a Mockingbird unit, and one of the characters is kind of a controversially courageous character. There's parts of her that are very courageous, and there's parts that aren't, and so there's definitely ways to argue both. And so students had to choose a yes or a no, and then they had to defend their particular position. So you'll see by each student's name whether they chose pro or con, and you'll see their indented discussions or replies to one another, and then some cons. And then at the end of the debate, I publish it to results, and it just shows me in the pie graph how many students said yes, how many students said no, and then again, it's really easy to bring those conversations back into class. Okay, 60% of you said she was courageous, but 40% said that she wasn't. Why don't you? Let's bring up some of the highlights from our discussion. Has anyone, based on reading your peers' ideas, kind of changed your stance? And why is that? And so another example of what that looks like on the pie graph, and you'll see a couple of my classes did it, and they kind of fall. Their percentages are slightly different. It's just a great way to get them involved and to see an outcome of a conversation. But then it takes a lot of time and attention on the part of the teacher to design good questions. Good questions that, aren't going to be answered with one sentence, that they're going to be layered, that they're going to be gray area answers, that it's not just going to be a yes or a no and I don't really have anything else to say. And one of the things I've worked on is a document called, The Art of Asking Questions. What are some of the things we can do to design questions that are really going to drive conversations that keep going, where students don't get to the site and then feel like, I don't really have anything else to say on this topic, it's already been said.
Can I ask you one? When do they do all of this interaction? Is it during class times? Is it after school?
No.
Is it...
Well, I don't have any computers in my room except for the ancient computer that I've had in there for years that doesn't do a whole lot. So what I do is, really this is taking the place for me of the, you're going to read X amount of chapters, you do these reading comprehension questions so I can make sure you read these chapters. But it's so uninspired, and then it creates just this mounting amount of work for me to process and grade and enter. And so instead, now I'll say read X amount of chapters, and they annotate when they read, and then I'll say you have to post 2 replies to 2 different discussion questions, and then comment on 2 of your peers' ideas. And so then at night, or the next day, or during my prep or whenever, it's so much quicker for me to scan, and I've actually chosen not to be an active participant in their discussions, because I don't want to feel like they think I have all the right answers, and I'm going to come in and give them the right answers. So I want them to brainstorm, them to be the generators of knowledge.
Yeah, like 9 o'clock at night.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I think the heaviest is like 8 to probably 11:30 is when they're getting on after sports and practice. Although, like I said at the very beginning, a lot of my students, and one of my big hesitations was, I don't know if they have access at home. And a lot of kids have had to turn off their internet for money reasons. They don't have computers at home. But we have a fantastic library with a collection of computers. And so many of my students have built in time to go to the library during lunch or during a break in their schedule or after school and do their postings. And usually it just takes a few minutes to check in and post once. Sometimes they'll come back and then do their replies to their peers later. My co-worker, we work in floors at Windsor, so the science teacher I work really closely with, she has the luxury of computers in her room. So a lot of them hang out there at lunch and do their postings. So access hasn't been the scary issue that I thought that it might be. It's actually been really easy to get them to computers and make that available to them. So this is pretty much all done. All their responses are done at home. And then my job is kind of weaving them back in. How do I then revisit them? A lot of times I pull the highlights of a discussion, like somebody said this and this is strong, and then we build, and then the discussion goes even further. Or we'll do some creative writing prompts, and I'll pull the best ones and ask those students to share them in class. The only time I ever comment or have commented on their work is when we used it for peer editing. So for our first essay, they went through and posted like their introductions, their thesis statements, their best quote introduction, and they gave each other feedback, and that was a fabulous way to use it. And then I did end up going and giving them specific feedback on their writing, since it was more of a, I wanted to make sure that if they were making a blatant mistake, that I was kind of...
And you're modeling for the other students.
Yes, and so many of the corrections I'm making, I make the same ones over and over again on the paper. So it was like, I could literally just cut and paste some of the same comments and then personalize some. It was just so much faster for me. So here's an example of a writing assignment that is really where I feel like I'm coming into my ability to create some higher level thinking questions. So I had them read the jailhouse scene from To Kill a Mockingbird, and then choose from the list one of the characters, and then rewrite the scene from that person's perspective, and like incorporate sensory details and some of the actual dialogue from the text to really bring it to life. And we've done a couple like this, and I pulled the best ones, and we read them in class, and we rotated, so they read a couple of them, and they pulled out, why was this one so effective? What about it really brought this story to life? And it's been a great tool for kind of engaging them and getting them to develop a little bit as creative writers as well.
Watch part 2 of the SCOE 2010 Curriculum and Technology Symposium at youtube.com/Collaborize.